Have any of you heard the rumor about the serial killer that was dumping bodies out on Cow Mountain? What if I told you? It's not a rumor. And I've got the story for you here today. Hi, my name is Cheyenne Blue. I'm a real estate agent here in Lake County, California. However, I really like telling stories surrounding the area, both the good, the bad, and the stuff we really don't want to know, but yet we're very intrigued about. And this one, it's a very bad, dark story. I'm going to give you all a trigger warning. This has to do with sexual assault. It has to do with domestic abuse, of course, murder. And yeah, just about everything you can think of is going to be compiled into this video because I go into the history before they started killing. And yes, it wasn't just one serial killer, it was two. And I'm also going to go into what happened to the victims and the victims' family, not go into extreme detail about what happened to the victims, but more of how it affected the victims' family and the history of the victims before what happened. And then I'll also go into what the family said about the serial killers and things along that line. So this story is definitely going to be a heavy one, but it is unfortunately a piece of our history. And this piece of history didn't happen that long ago. Their reign of killing was around about 1984 to 1999. And one of those killers is right now, to this day, sitting on death row. So this did not start in Lake County. This started in a small town called Linden, and Linden is actually about 3 hours away from Lake County and about 100 miles away from San Francisco. Now I am going to talk about the part that has to do with Lake County later in the video, so stay tuned for that. But Linden is a very similar community to Lake County in the way that it's a pretty small community. I mean, I talk about Lake County as a county in a whole, but Lake County is made up by several small towns, and Linden was a very small town in itself. The two people that we're going to be talking about today is Lauren Herzog and Wesley Shermantine. Now, these two were actually lifetime best friends. They grew up on the same street. They had known each other since they were 3 years old, and they were just, at the hip. You never saw the two of them without each other. Now, Herzog was said to be a quiet, tow-headed little boy and was, basically like, every mother's child that they wanted type of thing. Like, he was a very good little boy. And a lot of people actually really liked Herzog. Now, Shermantine was described on the vast opposite. Shermantine was considered to be more of a bully, and he constantly went down on everyone else and would beat people up and stuff like that. Like, he was just, from the start, not a very good person, and he was always in trouble. He was always starting trouble. Now, Shermantine didn't come from, like, a poor family. Their family was actually very well off. Shermantine's father was actually a successful contractor, and he would shower Wesley with material things throughout his life. And they were also avid hunters, and they would take both the boys hunting and fishing until they were old enough to go on their own. The boys, they spent much of their time exploring the hills, the rivers, the mine shafts of San Joaquin County. And, mostly normal boy things. I mean, most boys around here, too, love to explore the area, hunt, fish, etc. However, even though Shermantine's family was well off, they were not that well, if you catch my drift. Old newspaper clippings show dozens and dozens of headlines about the Shermantine men going to jail for fights, burglary, etc. And one Stockton Record headline from 1957 says, "Brothers held after a brawl of beating a man." A follow-up story exclaims, "Judge rules Shermantine pair guilty." So there's definitely a history of violence going on with the Shermantine family. The Shermantine family was known in the area as a family that you did not want to mess with. They did their own thing and they did what they wanted to do. So if you were to cross them, it didn't end up good for you, and most of the town actually avoided them for this reason. Domestic violence was a common factor in this family, and unfortunately the children were the main ones on the receiving end. Mostly by the mother, who had a horrible addiction to alcohol. And it was said both Shermantine's mother and father would shoot guns at their feet to make them dance as little kids. It was their own sick, twisted way of punishing the kids. I'll never understand why people do that. Outside of the family dynamics, Wesley's mom, she actually ended up taking a bulldozer to someone's house who hadn't paid their bill to her husband. She drove it straight through the man's house and barely missed him in the room where he was laying on his bed. So yeah, honestly, it's safe to say that Wesley Shermantine didn't have much of a chance from the get-go. In spite of all this, though, Herzog and Shermantine, they remained best friends through high school into adulthood, and it seems that what one did, the other one would do, including bullying, hard drinking, and eventually serious, hardcore drugs. After they left high school, the duo were regulars at their local bars, and they ended up becoming very heavy users of meth around 1985 when their reign of terror started. Their first victim was 19-year-old Chevy Wheeler. On the day of her disappearance, she told friends that she would be skipping school to go to Valley Springs with a friend of hers. That friend was Wesley Shermantine. Her friend said that she seemed nervous about the trip and requested that her father be told where she was going in case she did not return. It's a little weird. And as we know it, Wheeler, she failed to turn up at the end of the day. Her friends told her father what she had told them. The police were notified. And see, Chevy and Shermantine were friends at the time. They were actually a little bit more than friends. They had actually dated frequently, and Wes, he would come over to the house and listen to music and hang out with their family. Like, it wasn't like she just went with this random stranger. She had actually known him for a while, trusted this person, and like I said, they were dating. Of course, her family asked Wes about the disappearance, and he denied having anything to do with her disappearance. The detectives ended up investigating a cabin that Shermantine's family owned. And here they found hair and possible blood at the cabin. But at this time, there was no way to confirm that it was Chevy's. Even confirm if it belonged to a human, and this would be considered circumstantial at the time. So unfortunately, they got away with it for a while. Now we fast forward. It's November of 1998, and Cindy Vanderheiden's parents had just pulled off a surprise party for their daughter at their local bar. And during the surprise party, there's pictures of Cindy just beaming and having fun with her friends, singing karaoke and, just being a young, happy girl at her parents' bar. And see, Shermantine and Herzog, they both were regulars at the bar. Not only were they regulars, but Herzog actually had been dating Cindy's sister for a brief period of time, Kim. It was known that Shermantine had a dark side. He was suspected in the 1985 disappearance of Chevy Wheeler, even though it was never convicted. And at this point, there were quite a few others that had already accused him of sexual assault. At this point, he hadn't spent any time in prison, even though we know he killed someone, and even though we know that he was sexually assaulting people. He didn't spend any time in prison. That night, Cindy and her friend left the bar, and they went back to where Cindy had left her car. Her friend followed her back to her parents' home, where she was staying until her temporary job became full-time. Her friend watched long enough to see Cindy pull safely into the driveway. And the next morning, Teresa Vanderheiden, Cindy's mom, she looked into her room and saw that the bed was neatly made and thought that her daughter had already gone to work. Later that morning, John Vanderheiden, which was Cindy's father, He ended up heading over to his other business, which was a heating and cooling business. And on his way there, he happened to see his daughter's car over by the cemetery. There was nobody in sight of the car. And before long, the Vanderheidens learned that Cindy never made it to her job that morning. John Vanderheiden went back to investigate Cindy's car. And upon looking in the car, he found her purse, he found her cell phone in the center console, the cigarettes in the back seat, but they couldn't find her keys that had her little Tigger keychain on it. See, Tigger was actually her nickname for her bounciness and bubbliness, and she was just always full of happiness. She was a former cheerleader over at the Cavaliers High School and graduated from Lodi High School. By the next day, there were over 50 people looking for Cindy Vanderheiden. Within the week, the number just grew and grew as friends and strangers searched by helicopter, horseback, Harleys, you name it. Losing someone in a small town, it's a big deal, especially when the family's pretty well known. It's like how things around here happen. It doesn't matter what it is, but it's like the whole town knows right away. Everyone in Clements to this day still knows one another, and the Vanderheidens, they actually moved there when Cindy was only 4 months old. So she spent literally her entire life there. Cindy's disappearance quickly became big news, not only because she was missing, but because her family refused to let her just be another number. They organized massive searches, and friends, they held fundraisers. Her older sister, Kimberly, she was actually living in Wyoming at the time, and she immediately packed up and headed straight to California to find her sister. She was so sure that her sister would turn up alive. It wouldn't be until much, much later that they would find her, but she wouldn't be alive. Her family, they never gave up. Her sister spent 9 tireless years in California searching for her sister. Her focus was to bring her little sister home. She took charge of the search headquarters, which started in the Clements building and then moved to her father's shop. Their dad installed 2 phone lines and a fax machine, and he even paid for a toll-free 800 number for people to anonymously give tips. Kim was the one that manned the phone. She would literally spend overnight next to the phone just hoping that somebody would call saying that they found her sister alive. She would never get that call. However, this was no longer some small town missing persons case. This blew up, and thousands of calls started coming in from across the country. Meanwhile, the San Joaquin County Sheriff's investigators were watching Shermantine and Herzog. Shermantine was the primary suspect of the disappearance because of what happened with Chevy Wheeler. But though they had a strong belief, they couldn't find any concrete evidence to prove what was going on. That was until 1999. Shermantine's car got repossessed, they found blood inside, and it was Cindy's. Shermantine and Herzog, they were both arrested for murder. The interviewers focused their attention on Lauren, and Lauren, he started spilling the beans. However, he made it seem like Shermantine was the one that did everything. He started telling investigators how Shermantine had killed a hunter in Utah named Henry Howell, and he was found shot in his car. That he also killed a 24-year-old woman named Robin Armtrout, whose body was found stabbed nearly a dozen times on the east bank of Potter Creek near Linden. He also said that Shermantine killed Howard King and Paul Cavanaugh, whose bodies were found shot to death in a car off a remote road on Roberts Island in 1984. The tracks at that scene actually match Wesley Shermantine's vehicle. Shermantine, on the other hand, he did not want to let any information out. Well, actually, he would let information out, but for a price. He asked for $20,000 in order to give information on where Cindy's body was buried. And the Vanderheidens understandably wanted no part of that. Because, they've already been devastated financially, mentally, everything. because of this man, and he's wanting more from them. He already took their daughter's life, and yet he wants more. A bounty hunter actually ended up offering to pay the money, that way they could find the bodies, but unfortunately, no deal was made. He asked for the same thing from other victims' families, but nobody complied. Quite frankly, I don't blame him. Like I said, these guys already took enough from them. The trial of Wesley Sermentine started in Santa Clara. The prosecutor painted this picture of a ruthless predator on a 15-year-long rampage. The trial was moved to Santa Clara because of the amount of publicity that this case was getting. And Sermentine, he was charged with killing 3 people in the 1980s and Cindy in 1998, though only 2 of the bodies at this time had been found. Prosecutors told the jury that they believe these guys had killed 20 or more people. Well, at this point, they mainly specified Sermentine, and I'll get into why they believe that. Prosecutors told the jury that they believed Sermentine had killed 20 or more people, dumping their bodies in mine shafts, remote hillsides, and buried underneath a trailer park. There are no fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no smoking gun. The prosecutor, Thomas Testa, said in opening statements, "It's all in the details." Testa said that Sermentine told relatives and acquaintances that he made people disappear around the outskirts of Stockton. Confrontation with one woman in a trailer park, Sermentine allegedly told her, "Listen to the heartbeats of people I buried here. Listen to the heartbeats of families I buried here." On top of this, several witnesses testified that they had been brutalized by Sermentine. 5 women testified that he had raped or sodomized them. A babysitter who said she had been attacked when she stopped by to collect money he owed her, he raped her too. And a woman that he had rear-ended her car, he then kidnapped at knife point when she pulled off the road to exchange insurance information. She jumped from his car while it was moving and managed to get away. His estranged wife actually described about how he had brutally beaten her for years, hitting her while she was pregnant and holding her children in her lap while he was doing it. Sermentine's sister also stated that he had sexually assaulted her, and he wasn't the only one that sexually assaulted her. Herzog did too. However, at this point, the way things were being stated, Herzog was making it seem very much like everything was Wesley's idea and that he was just a bystander and that he was afraid of Wesley and what he would do if he were to come out about it. However, this does get more interesting over time. Apparently, Sermentine had once told Herzog that he killed 22 people in California, Utah, and Nevada. West told several individuals that he had hunted the ultimate kill, humans. In court, both men insisted it was the other who did all the killings. Sermentine insisted Herzog is solely to blame for the killing and hinted he knows where the body of Vanderheiden and the other victims may have been stashed. Herzog's attorney said that Sermentine's version of the event seemed like a desperate attempt to ploy and deflect blame. During more than 17 hours of questioning by the San Joaquin County sheriffs, Herzog implicated Sermentine in 5 unsolved Northern California killings, as well as the death of a hunter in Utah in 1994. Herzog continuously stated that he had only watched as Sermentine committed each of the murders. Herzog, he was there for the murder of Cindy Vanderheiden. He stated that he heard everything and that he was scared of Wesley. He alluded that Wesley threatened to kill him if he were to speak up. Herzog stated that he told me one time he killed 24 people or something. I thought he was just being full of... Herzog stated that he wished that he could turn the clock backwards, turn time back. Now, was that for the victims? Or was it for himself? The FBI officials, they ended up searching Sermentine's family's home, and here they found $40,000 worth of guns. And not only did they find that, but they ended up finding the dismembered body of a Tuolumne County woman that was found in a burned out barrel. Shermantine ended up offering a new deal. He said that if his two young sons received $20,000, he would reveal the location of the bodies of 4 victims, 2 of which he was convicted, as well as 2 more. Although at this time he had already been convicted for 4 murders, police believed that he would be responsible for up to 22. Authorities had offered to drop the death penalty in order to find the extra bodies. However, Shermantine declined, and his only interest was in the cash. The victims' families, who were very much for Shermantine getting the death penalty, they were considering dropping the death penalty in order to find the bodies. However, they were very much against giving up so much money. They also wanted to help other families find their missing loved ones, and Shermantine, he offered to reveal the locations of several bodies that he hadn't even been charged with at this point. The prosecutor who ended up prosecuting both men said he was disappointed when Herzog's jury rejected the death sentence in 2001, and that the judge had sentenced him to only 78 years in prison on the 3 first-degree murder convictions. In 2004, the news got worse. There was an appeal, unfortunately, and it ended up tossing out Herzog's convictions and sentence. They said that the confession was illegally coerced. The court ruled that investigators ignored his several requests for a lawyer and pressed on with their interrogation after his 1999 arrest. And without the videotape confession, prosecutors said that they were left with very little evidence and had no choice but to offer Herzog a deal to plead guilty to voluntary manslaughter for the killing of Vanderheiden. His 78-year prison sentence was reduced to only 14 years. Not only that, but he got credit for good behavior. Because he was doing so well in the jail, the credit ended up going towards the sentence. They could no longer hold him. Witnesses who testified against him, they were terrified that he was going to retaliate at them. While the prosecutors, they were worried about him covering up his tracks. Families of the victims were outraged and they were terrified. While Herzog got to go back home to his family and his wife, and some of them had no idea where their loved ones were buried, but he got to go free. Now, Herzog's attorney tried to put all these fears to rest, saying that Herzog basically was a victim himself and that he was just, this innocent bystander and that the news had just painted this totally different picture of him. His lawyer basically portrayed him as this dim country bumpkin that was led astray by his dominant and evil friend who masterminded all the killings. And he said that Herzog was a non-participating bystander during all the murders and just helped his friend cover the tracks afterwards. He could have done something to change it. Nonetheless, he unburdened himself with the tales of the murders, and he said that he believed that the police interrogating him would set him free once he told that he was only a witness to Shermantine's horrors. At the end of the 4th day of his last interview, the investigator asked Herzog, "Why did you cooperate?" Herzog said he was hoping to get that killer off the street and looked forward to leaving jail. He said, "I feel it's gonna work out, man. I'm going home sometime. I gotta go home and see my wife and kids. I gotta raise them." The prosecutor, though, knew he was just pulling wool over the jury's eyes. The prosecutor said that he did not want Herzog on the street and that they could have had him stay in jail had he gone to trial. Herzog pleaded guilty to connection of 3 other deaths and to providing methamphetamine to Cindy. In addition, Herzog was ordered to pay $50,000 in restitution to Cindy's family to ensure that Mr. Herzog would never profit from any story that he had to tell about the unfortunate events. The lawyers also shone a light on the interrogation practices of the detectives, pointing out that Herzog was physically exhausted, deprived of food, and threatened over the course of several days of the interviews. The court said detectives ignored Herzog's attempts to invoke his right to remain silent. Despite all this, the sheriff's station, they stood by their investigation tactics, and they said that they disagreed with the findings of the court appeal. The sheriff stated that they reviewed the transcripts of the interrogations. However, if they had actually watched the video, they would have seen a different story. See, there's only so much in people's words that can be believed. You also got to pay attention to the way that they move, the way that they speak. Not just the words that are being said, but the way they say it. And that was a telltale sign in the actual videotapes. He believed that had they seen those videos, that the jury would end up having a very different decision. He believed that if they had seen those videos, the court would have had a very different decision. At the end, even though they were not happy about the plea deal, they weren't surprised. Sherman Tyne was offered the chance to be taken off of death row and given immunity from any of the crimes discovered in the future. In return, he would have to testify against Herzog and lead investigators to Cindy Vanderheiden's body. Sherman Tyne declined the deal and said that he was afraid to be a snitch in prison. However, after some time passed, Sherman Tyne apparently sent letters from his cell on death row. And in this letter, he stated that 16-year-old Joanne Hobson, who disappeared 19 years ago, that Herzog was her killer. It was stated that Herzog that night had a date with the girl, and at the end of it, he killed her. Sherman Tyne also ended up writing a letter to the Vanderheiden family, offering to finally testify against Herzog. Sherman Tyne, now 45, finally starts spilling the locations of the missing victims. He apologized for taking several years to reveal where they disposed of the bodies. And upon discovering Wes's testimony, Herzog took his life. His parole officer found him deceased in his own home. He hung himself. The murders involved 21 counties around California, as well as communities in Nevada. He said Herzog stowed some bodies in wells near Linden at a spot that he calls Lawrence Boneyard. From Lawrence Boneyard, law enforcement, they dug up more than 1,000 bones, including 2 human skulls that ended up identifying as Wheeler and Cindy. Although it was unfortunate, at least they were finally found so they could be put to rest. Upon excavating further in some other areas, they ended up finding bones of over 10 bodies. And Sherman Tyne said that they were likely going to find more. Sherman Tyne revealed that another 14 murder victims were located on Lake County's Cow Mountain area. That's right, our Lake County. So far, there haven't really been many identities for the victims said to be buried in Lake County, with which Sherman Tyne and Herzog weren't previously linked. It hasn't been made clear if these bodies were actually from here or brought from other areas. So far, the ones that we know are stated were from out of the area. 2 individuals that Sherman Tyne had been linked to was Stephen William Branston, who was 20 and last seen in Lakeport in August of 1996. The other was Robert Blair Sturgill, who was 30, and he was last seen in Lucerne in 1990. Both of them disappeared during the time that Sherman Tyne and Herzog were on their rampage. I scoured the internet for as many articles as I could find on what happened with the bodies on Cow Mountain, but I can't find anything that states whether those bodies were ever recovered or what exactly happened from all that. Now, Cow Mountain and the Mendocino National Forest, they're very vast areas. And if somebody gets lost out there or buried out there, it's going to be really hard to find them, especially after so much time has passed. So it is very possible that those bodies could be missing forever. But who knows? Because, I mean, out there, not only do you have all that area, but you also have bears, mountain lions, you name it. And yeah, I couldn't find anything on them finding those bodies. Now, I have heard in the past about somebody finding a couple out there, and I'm not sure how exactly that went or what happened after that, but I am aware of someone finding a couple that had been murdered out there. Originally, it was believed that they were responsible for about 15 to 22 murders. But now officials, they estimate that the pair's victims could be more than 70. I mean, it actually ended up going as high as 112. According to one of the other inmates, it was stated that Herzog told him it was 112. Family members of missing people all over are wondering, were they victims of the speed freak killers? Alright, I'm checking in with you guys. Are you doing okay? Because I know this story is a heavy one, and I know it's a lot to take in. But these people, they exist, even in small communities. When you think about it, I mean, really think about it, how did they get away with hurting people for so long? I mean, I know it was a different time. Evidence was done differently back then. There also was a period of time where there was really no such thing as DNA evidence. But there were many of their victims that survived and lived in the same area, and it was such a small area. So I'm not sure how many reports were made, but it was stated that there were at least 5 girls that spoke about what he had done, including the one that he kidnapped. And I couldn't find anything on like when those reports were made or anything like that I could bring you guys. However, I do know that when stuff like this happens, it's hard for the victims to come forward. And it doesn't mean it hasn't happened. It means that they're scared. And a lot of people are scared. They're scared that they're not going to be believed. They're scared that people aren't going to listen to them because of who they are. And not only are they scared of that, but these people, they will threaten your life. They will threaten your family's life. They will threaten the things that are most important to you. They will threaten to slander your name and do all these horrible, disgusting things to you and the people that you love. So that could be a large reason as to why they did get away with it for so long. There are also some people, like the sister, where they hope that they'll get better. Because here's the thing with Wes. He was not always the horrible monster. He actually was a kind person to his sister based on some of the other reports that I read. And then he later turned into a monster. This is a reason that when people are doing horrendous things, please report it. I know it's scary. I know that it's really hard to come forward. But reporting it does help to get justice in the end. And if it's happened to you, it's likely happened to other people. And it's likely going to happen to people after. So I know it's hard, but report it. Many people like these guys, they start with violent crimes and sexual assault. And then it escalates the longer they get away with it. So please report. It really does help in the long run. The truth comes out eventually, and when you speak up, it's likely you'll give others the courage to come forward too. If you've been a survivor to violence or domestic violence, I'm going to list a bunch of resources down below that may be able to help you, as well as the national resources. I want to help you guys in any way that I can, including if this unfortunately was you. And I know that you can do it. You can speak up. Stay safe out there, everyone. And I hope you have a great day.